us off?
Please do.
So this is just a short collection of our thoughts from the ALT conference that we attended a couple of weeks ago now. It was the 25th annual conference of learning technologists, and for both of us I think it was the first time that we'd been.
Yeah.
So it's quite a daunting conference, 3 days of
pretty
it's
full on.
quite a intense programme. So it's probably best if we start with the keynotes from each day.
I think so, yeah. The first keynote, Tressie McMillan-Cotton, she was great.
Yeah, really good.
I wanted to bottle her up.
So her keynote was around, she's a sociologist, and she was just talking about how she'd redesigned her unit. But the nice things, I think, particularly from the learning technologist perspective, is that it was done in partnership. So it wasn't a add-on, it was they was an equal footing, and they also helped and taught on the unit as well, and they used a lot of nice splendid spaces. It was just a very nice course, and I think there was kind of two sort of key things that was from that. I think one was that to affect change like that, you almost still have to do it on a very small scale and slightly under the radar. And then once you've embedded it, you can get a bit bigger. But also, I think the ability to fail was almost encouraged, and you won't learn unless you're trying, unless you're failing. And part of that was kind of a healthy way of looking at it, was rather than saying what went wrong, it's kind of like, what can we do to make it better? And I thought
that was an undercurrent throughout the whole event, really, wasn't it? The fact that there are people who are trying different things, and some of it's successful and some of it isn't, and that's okay.
It's very nice to see. So the second day was Amber Thomas, who is the head of academic technology at the University of Warwick, and I think hers was more, because it was 25 years, hers was a bit more of a journey along her career and just seeing how technology had changed, but also sort of highlighting, I think, was something that's probably felt quite widely across the sector, is that we're all imposter syndrome, I think, is the way she put it, and being good at lots of different things, but being that linchpin between varying parts of an institution, and pulling everything together. It was quite an interesting journey through her career.
Yeah, there was a really nice point where she got everyone to stand up if they'd ever felt like they'd suffered from imposter syndrome, and probably about 95% of the auditorium got up on their feet, and that it was just nice knowing that we all feel that a little bit once in a while.
And then Maren Deepwell, who's the chief executive of ALT, did the third day, and hers was around again how educational technology has shaped over the last sort of 25 years, and she sort of talks quite a lot about ALT's role and the role of technologists in being, whether it's a field or a discipline, but also then obviously talking quite a bit around promoting the CMALT qualification as well, which is fair enough.
All the keynotes are available
on
YouTube as well, so they're well worth tracking down. I saw some really interesting stuff in the individual sessions. There was a good thread about accessibility. Seeing the University of Derby, or Derby as the Kiwi from Catalyst called them, and then backtracked when someone corrected him. They were chatting about using Blackboard Ally, which is something we've just launched today as of this date of recording. So it was really interesting hearing their journey and kind of their experiences of deploying this accessibility feature that's built into Blackboard. And that was followed up very quickly by a session with the University of Southampton, talking about making sure that PowerPoint slides and presentations are fully accessible, and they were arguing that it's the format that gets used the most to present information to students, so we should make sure that it is actually fully accessible, and they went through some of the tips and techniques, and that was very good.
So I kind of focused on a couple of things. I mean, one, just because of my own work I've been doing around lecture capture, so I saw some interesting talks from York who were trying to take the discussion. They're in a very similar position to us, but they're trying to take this discussion beyond lecture capture and looking at media in different ways, and trying to encourage staff to make more interesting materials. That was a I'd seen a version of the talk before, but it was still very interesting to go and see that. And I saw a couple of talks around audio and video feedback. One in particular that was quite interesting was an example in Northumbria. And they did it really differently to the way that we did. I mean, that was a distance learning course, so they were trying to bring that personal touch to students that didn't have that contact with on campus. But it was really interesting, but I think it was a very small scale, and as we've done here, it's the difficulty in how you scale that up, more around how you share the content, and they were struggling with that as well. But the kind of quite nice, it was very very well thought out project. The interesting I thought was they scripted all of the feedback, so the actual work to do that, and gave students on average about 8 minutes, which is a little bit more than I think than some of the academics we've worked with here. The second theme I had a look at was around again digital literacies and transition to university, which was a very interesting space and quite timely because where we are at the moment. And I don't know how much that discussion's moved on in a number of years. People are still questioning whether the incoming students are digitally literate or not, and are the staff digitally literate. And I don't think anyone had any concrete answers, but it's interesting that discussion's still bubbling away. And considering that I think it's this year or next year the students who are coming in will have never known a world without an iPhone. So what point do we actually just draw a line under this conversation and say actually but what is digital literacy? We sort of talking about whether you can buy a pair of trainers doesn't mean you can access Blackboard, find your submission point. So I still think it's around good scaffolding and good design.
I saw a really interesting card game called Grasp, which was basically a learning design framework. This was put together by a learning technologist from CU Scarborough, and basically he dealt with a lot of academics who were new to teaching. So they'd kind of worked in industry and then were coming in and teaching students. And he was just trying to stop them using PowerPoint all the time. So he developed this learning design framework using card games with lots of different options. And it tapped into something that we've been experimenting with here, using a card game type to create scenarios and get people kind of reflecting on what they're doing. So that was great. And then dovetailing into that quite nicely, Nicola Whitten from Manchester Metropolitan University gave a really good presentation about collaborative game making. And there was a lot of stuff there about students creating their own games and computer games, so both kind of physical and digital games. There was stuff around escape rooms, which definitely isn't everyone's bag.
No.
But I really like the idea of having these kind of base portable kits that they could give to students to help create their own learning games. I thought that was really neat.
Yeah, that was a nice project. I mean, one that stands out to me, one of the talks, just because it was so different to all the others, was one around robots in education. And that was really interesting just because a lot of the talks at ALT were very much, as you would expect, the kind of, this is what we set out to do, this is what we did, this is what we found. Whereas this was possibly the only thing I saw that was very much an emerging field, in that we have these robots, how can they be used in education? I don't have any answers. I don't know really, what's the definition of a robot. So it was just actually really interesting to hear someone, she started her research and shared some of her methodology and how she started the research, but it was really interesting just to hear someone talk about something they actually genuinely wanted assistance with, rather than the kind of, this is what we set out, done, results. So that was a really interesting 20 minutes.
I really enjoyed one of the lightning talks. So this is the old sort of turbo tell, very short, quick fire discussions and talks on a variety of different subjects. And the session they had was great. There was, I think, 6 or 7 academics or learning technologists just discussing about projects they've done. For instance, there was a really good one about design aesthetics for using Articulate 360, which is a tool we're starting to use. There was some good stuff about student submission on Panopto, video submission on Panopto, which was pretty cool. There there was a really interesting talk from someone who was new to learning technologist about her experiences of going in as an institution's first learning technologist. That was great. And there was some good stuff about learning design recipes using the ABC framework, which is something that I know that our educational development team use here.
I think it's a very big conference, and it was the first time. I think I would definitely recommend people to go.
Yeah, it's great.
Manchester was a nice city as well.
Yeah.
So we had a nice wander around Manchester, and it was good just to meet some of your peers that
absolutely
particularly where institutional approaches are very, very different.
Yeah, we had a really good chat with a chap from Manchester who manages the lecture capture there, and I mean very different setup to us, very different approach. But really useful, and actually we've picked up a few ideas that might be useful in the future.
Yeah, it was definitely with some colleagues in Reading who have run a very similar path to us, in that they have Blackboard and they're managed hosted, and they're looking at the same similar lecture capture solutions. So it's quite nice to see institutions that are very similar in the way that you approach things, and ones that do it in a completely different way, but actually still pushing towards the same aim of trying to enhance the student experience.
And I think that's the thing that really sort of struck me. We might all be using different tools. We might all be using, you know, some of us are on Blackboard, some of us are on Moodle, but ultimately it's the same aims, isn't it? It's the same kind of path which we're going along.
And I think the community feel was quite strong, and I was quite surprised by that. Actually, I thought it wouldn't be so.
It was really friendly.
Yeah. Very friendly conference.
So 2 thumbs up from me.
And me.